School. Hi, Jerry Mark. Okay. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. My struggle began with alcohol and drugs, but I've come to understand that low self-esteem, codependency, overspending, love and relationship addiction, and lust have all been a part of the struggle as well. I was raised in a Christian home a few miles southeast of here in Lansing, Illinois. I grew up the youngest of 7 siblings in a family of believers. Church was always a part of life in my family. At 3 years of age, I became an uncle. When I was about 5, my dad began drinking a lot. This set our idyllic family life on a very uneven keel. I remember fights between him and Mom over his frequent tavern visits. Well, he drank at home too. Even made drinks for me, although there was probably only enough whiskey to color the lemon lime soda and change the taste a little bit. I thought it was cool that I was drinking with my dad. This went on until one Sunday evening, Mom caught wind of it. Because of close connection with the church, there were pastor visits to follow, promises by Dad to quit drinking that were soon broken, but in the end, Dad never did quit drinking. I began to see that his attention was drawn more to my nieces and nephews than me, at least his positive attention anyway. Mom, on the other hand, was more of a softie and overcompensated. I became a bit spoiled. After all, I was the youngest kid. As time went on, Dad became to verbally abuse both when he drank and more when he was sober as well. For me, it began with sarcastic insults yelled and demeaning remarks that he thought were just friendly ribbing as I went through puberty. Since our house and the body shop were on the same property, often the insults were in front of the hired help. Needless to say, my self-esteem hit an extreme low. I became a shy hermit, spending almost all my time in my room, silently dreaming of what I would do one day when I got up the nerve. This went on for a couple years. At 14 years old, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior and began attending campus life meetings. In my sophomore year of high school, I invited some friends to attend the meetings. They, in turn, asked me to join a co-ed bowling league. Being a shy kid, wanting to talk to girls but too scared to follow through, I thought this was the perfect tool to do so. I began to fraternize with the opposite sex. Wow, I was finally dating. Soon, parties with alcohol and makeout sessions became standard. We were just drinking. There was no way marijuana and drugs would enter the picture. One summer evening, while at a spring dance, actually a teen dance, I ran into a girl I was acquainted with from the previous school year. We began seeing each other, and she told me that some of the kids in her neighborhood smoked weed, and she did at times too. I resisted the urge to partake for a few months. I began to see that more and more kids were into weed. So I tried it a couple times, and it didn't do anything. During this time, I decided once and for all to pursue my lifelong dream to start a band, and became a rock star, or so I thought. I approached some guys. They accepted the proposal to be in the band, and Mannequin Glow was eventually born. My bandmates smoked weed, so out of curiosity, I bought a nickel bag. I invited a couple of the boys and got high for my very first time. I loved the feeling and decided it had to be God's gift to us since it grew naturally. Of course, my list of chemicals that I was never going to try grew. And I did try them. Then in February of 1974, while sitting in the study hall, I was called down to the dean's office. I was told to go home because my sister needed the car. When I arrived home, I found out that my sister Cheryl, 23 years old, married mother of 2, was found dead on her kitchen floor. Of course, I was devastated. And for some reason, the drug use got worse. It got to the point that I was willing to try anything and everything I could. In late March of that year, I was warming up my car and my mom caught me rolling some joints. I was now the delinquent of the family. While being grilled by my folks, 2 police officers walked in the house. I thought they were there for me, but they were there to report the findings of my sister's autopsy. The cause of death was cyanide poisoning. Coincidentally, my rebellion got worse. I drugged and drank as much as possible. I was 17 years old and completely out of control. After a failed drug deal turned into an attack and robbery with me as the victim, I knew something had to change. I joined the United States Marine Corps. When I got to boot camp at Parris Island, South Carolina, it was apparent to me that the drugs had turned me into a marshmallow. What was supposed to be an 11-week cycle became 5 months, during which time I did a lot of praying. I swore to God that I would never use drugs again. After graduation and the night I got home on my first leave, I was back to smoking weed behind the Burger King. Soon I was back to drinking and smoking weed regularly. While going through aviation training at Whidbey Island, Washington, my roommates and I were detained by the military police for marijuana use and possession. Interestingly, I met my first wife that weekend. She was what was known as a Westpac widow. This is a term for a Navy or Marine wife whose husband was currently serving overseas. She is a Filipina, 9 years my senior. You know, now that I look back, I realize I thought I needed a mother. You see, I was only up in Washington State for 6 weeks to receive training in the MOS or job that the Marine Corps assigned me to. I transferred back to California, and being the star-crossed lonely boy that I had become, I made some unauthorized trips to Washington to see her. And if you're wondering, yes, I went AWOL. In fact, I stacked up 6 weeks of unauthorized absence. She became pregnant with my son during that time. The way I was raised is that a man is supposed to take responsibility for his actions. And we married in May of 1976. Oh, by the way, my shenanigans of going over the hill on the pot bus cost me a stripe. I was reduced in rank from private first class to private and transferred to Cherry Point, North Carolina. By the way, I got in trouble there too. My son Rob Jr. was born there on September 10th, 1976. As far as the Marine Corps was concerned, I straightened up. Well, kind of. Being 19 years old, married and a father, however, is a different story. I was too young and immature. We fought violently over my drugging, her gambling, and the list and reasons seemed endless. After I completed my first Westpac deployment, Dolores got pregnant again. And on September 26, 1980, my daughter Rihanna was born. She was 2 months premature. My drugging, especially my marijuana use, was now out of control. It began to show in my duty performance. I was a sergeant by then. With bridges burned, I chose to transfer squadrons and go overseas again. It was the summer of 1981, and after a night of heavy drinking and smoking, Dolores and I got into a violent confrontation, and she grabbed a kitchen knife. I, in turn, tried to pull it out of her hand, and it sliced my left index finger down to the bone. Of course, when the hospital corpsman asked what happened, I lied and said I was just trying to pull a knife out of a cluttered kitchen drawer. Remember me saying I was codependent too? I returned from overseas in April of 1982. I decided to re-enlist for my third tour of duty. I was transferred to, guess where? Naval Air Station, Whidbey Island, Washington. This time, I was going to be an instructor. With infidelities on both sides, Dolores and I divorced in 1984. I drank a lot and pursued women a lot. I seldom drugged anymore because of the military's policy on illegal substances. Then in November of 1984, I got a DWI. For some reason, when that happened, my ex decided to give me full custody of my kids. I paid my debt to society and was ordered to get evaluated at the Drug and Alcohol Center on base. My boss told me to be honest with the interview to save my career. I was a staff sergeant by then. The interviewer recommended level 2 treatment. At the start of the group, I got into an all but brief relationship with a woman in my treatment group. Here goes my love and relationship addiction coming to light. I dated like crazy, thinking each relationship was going to be the one. I got engaged once. The lady, pregnant, promptly broke it off with me. By the way, my son Josh was born in January 1986. So I jumped into another one, got dumped, and was heartbroken. It was then that I realized I had depression. After a couple other brief relationships, and all the while pining for the one who dumped me, I got engaged and married a woman in the program, all within a little over a month's time. At her behest, I transferred to Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point. Another tumultuous marriage, a lot of fighting over kids, mainly. My squadron deployed to the Western Pacific. Does anybody remember the song, A Rainy Night in Georgia? Well, at work on a rainy night in Okinawa, I got a Dear John phone call. It's strange, but I had no remorse after that call. I got back to mainland Japan, Marine Corps Air Station Iwakuni to be specific, and briefly got involved with another woman. Soon, the squadron deployed to Naval Air Station Cuby Point, Philippines. Here comes the self-life fix attempt. I met a girl there and decided that I should marry her. I had my reasons. She was a Filipino. My 2 kids were Filipino. And she was pregnant. That kind of clinched it. When I got back stateside, my divorce from my second wife was final. I did a lot of thinking and decided not to marry the girl in the Philippines after all. And Carla, my niece's best friend, 3 years younger than me, was single and wanted to date me. I picked her up at the airport, and we got engaged that weekend. Liam, in the Philippines, was born that very same weekend. We were married for 10 years and had 3 kids together. In case you're counting, that makes 3 wives and 7 kids. During that time, I decided to leave the Marines. A lot of complications arose when I got back here, though, to the Chicago area. I took a job with the U.S. Postal Service. It was there that I made friends with a lady named Cheryl. You ever heard of her? We were buddies, but I realized one day that I was in love. I pursued her, and we were married on June 12th, 1999. Yep, we celebrated 20 years in June. Happily ever after had to wait. When we got together, I was about a year sober. A little backstory, I had a slip after 5 years of sobriety when I was in the Philippines, and I started drinking again. I was in '89. This time, sobriety lasted for about 2 years. Okay, now the tally is 3 divorces, 4 marriages, 7 kids. Oops, make that 9 with Cheryl's 2 kids. 2 periods of sobriety as well. My 3rd period of sobriety started 16 years ago on Halloween. It was 2003, and I had been doing my daily ritual of drinking beer. I loved my Sam Adams. I was on the phone with my daughter, Addie. At that time, she was 14 years old. I was giving her a lot of grief over the fact that my younger children, which she was one, were calling their stepdad, Dad. Cheryl heard me and didn't know what to think. She told me if I kept on with the abuse, she would call an ambulance. I dared her to. You know what? She did. I took it like a man. I ran out the front door and hid underneath the back porch of an apartment building across the street on the next block. As I watched the flashing lights bounce off the houses, I had a moment of clarity. Here I was, 46 years old. I had a disability that I had a rough time facing, that's depression and PTS. I was seriously drowning in my failed schemes and was for the last time in drunken misery. Suddenly I heard something that I'll never forget. The paramedic said, "Sorry, ma'am, we can't go look for him." That was my get out of, for lack of a better term, jail free card. After the ambulance left, I walked back into the house and told Cheryl I was done drinking. For some reason, a couple years later, we found our way back to church. It was there that Cheryl and I first heard about and joined Celebrate Recovery. I urged Cheryl to go because I knew I needed it, but I wanted her to understand the changes that I would be making in my life. Would you believe she found out she needed it as well? When Cheryl and I got together, I had just been rated by the VA at 50% service-connected disability. I'm now 100% service-connected. You see, my depression worsened over the years, and I found I couldn't function. I was scared all the time, and almost my entire life, I've had some low self-esteem as well. But CR has changed that by showing me the true love of Christ like I've never experienced before. We've served in CR for 12 years this month. Since being in recovery, I've struggled not only with alcohol. I've realized I've been addicted to love and relationships. I've been codependent, addicted to food, addicted to spending money. In the past, even in times when I was trying to practice sobriety, I reached for people and things that I thought would save me. But that only made things worse. Since being a part of Celebrate Recovery, things that I never thought possible have happened. I have reconnected with the children I fathered. Cheryl and I have been married for over 20 years. I've been sober for 16 of those years. With God's help and guidance, Cheryl and I, mostly me, survived raising 7 of our 9 kids. Having 5 teenage girls at one time was the hardest part. Although I've been raised in a Christian home and having accepted Jesus into my life as my Savior at 14, my relationship now grows with him stronger every day. I mentored under a man named Pastor Al Garcia, who we lovingly called Pal. I got ordained and I served for 3 years as the senior police chaplain for the city of Oak Forest. Cheryl and I, as you know, now serve as ministry leaders for this CR ministry, at CR at the Barn, on Friday nights here at Calvary Chapel. Life for me has more meaning than it ever did. I have a great relationship with all my kids, and both of Cheryl's daughter, our 10 grandkids. I've had the honor of marrying my son Josh and his wife Brandy, my older brother Dick Schoon and his wife Debbie, my daughter Rihanna and her husband, as well as my stepdaughter Kathleen. Although my disability has caused me to retire from the workforce, I still retain my ordination, and serving in Celebrate Recovery keeps me busy. The Veterans Initiative, Welcome Home, and the Mental Illness Initiative are close to my heart because you know what? I qualify. With God's loving guidance, we can save our heroes from their hurts, habits, and hang-ups. It's worked for me. My life verse is Psalm 46:10, which says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." That verse to me is the most relevant when it comes to my recovery. I love Celebrate Recovery because it changed my life. Being one of those people is a privilege in my book because I now know God had a plan for me, which brings me to my other life verse, Jeremiah 29:11, which says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." He's done that for me. I will always be grateful for that. Lastly, and I say this out loud, I want to thank the United States Marine Corps because you know what? They raised me for 17 years of my life. They kept me around. But God's kept me around longer. Thank you for letting me share.